There is a voice inside you that you have spent your entire life trying not to hear. It speaks when you are exhausted, when your defenses are down, when the body grows quiet enough for truth to leak through. It speaks in discomfort, in sudden anger, in shame that appears without reason, in the tightness of the chest you cannot explain. You have called this voice weakness. You have called it negativity. You have called it something to overcome. But it is none of those things. It is the part of you that knows exactly who you are pretending to be. You were not born hiding from yourself. The infant does not repress, does not split, does not lie inwardly. The fracture begins later, quietly, when the world teaches you which parts of your experience are welcome and which are dangerous. The nervous system learns faster than thought. Before language, the body learns fear. A raised voice, a withdrawn parent, a sudden punishment. These moments do not remain as memories. They become muscular tension, breathing patterns, postures of vigilance. The body learns what the mind will later call normal. This is how the shadow begins, not as evil, but as survival. The unconscious is not a dark basement of monstrous impulses. It is a vast, living intelligence that stores everything you could not afford to feel at the time it happened. When a child feels anger toward those it depends on, that anger must disappear to preserve attachment. When fear is too overwhelming, it is buried beneath numbness. When grief has no witness, it sinks into the tissues. What is pushed away does not dissolve. It reorganizes itself, it waits, and it speaks through symptoms, through compulsions, through the strange repetition of suffering that seems to follow you wherever you go. You think you make choices freely, but much of what you call choice is the shadow steering you away from pain you have not yet dared to understand. You avoid certain conversations without knowing why. You sabotage closeness just as it deepens. You feel an impulse to run when things become still. These are not moral failures. They are physiological memories. The body remembers what the conscious mind has forgotten. The shadow is the body's memory speaking in psychological language. Fear responses shape identity more than ideals ever do. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn. These are not abstract concepts, but deeply ingrained patterns of energy. The person who always agrees learned that disagreement once meant danger. The one who dominates learned that vulnerability was punished. The one who disappears learned that invisibility was safety. Over time, these responses harden into personality. You say, "This is just how I am," without realizing you are describing an old strategy that once saved you, but now silently governs you. The shadow speaks most clearly when you judge others harshly. What you despise with disproportionate intensity is rarely about the other person. It is the reflection of something in yourself that you were forced to disown. When you feel moral outrage that burns hotter than reason, pause. Something in you is trying to return. When you feel envy that tastes like bitterness, listen. It is pointing toward a denied desire, a path you told yourself you were not allowed to want. The shadow does not speak politely. It speaks through disturbance. Emotional suppression is not strength. It is a temporary anesthetic that demands interest later. What you refuse to feel does not vanish. It descends into the unconscious and recruits the body to express it. Headaches, chronic fatigue, digestive problems, shallow breathing. These are not merely mechanical failures. They are the language of what has been silenced. The body becomes the stage upon which unacknowledged emotion performs. This is why insight alone does not heal. Understanding without embodiment changes very little. The nervous system must be included in truth. Identity as you know it is a compromise. It is the face you learned would be accepted. But beneath that constructed self is a reservoir of unlived life. There are impulses you never explored, emotions you never integrated, capacities you never trusted. The shadow is not only pain, it is potential. But potential feels threatening when it contradicts the story you have built about who you are, so you cling to familiarity, even when it suffocates you. The unconscious prefers wholeness to comfort. It will disturb you until you listen. You fear the shadow because you believe it will destroy you. In truth, it threatens only the false image you depend on. The inner conflict you feel, the exhaustion, the sense of living slightly off-center, comes from the constant effort of holding the shadow down. This effort consumes enormous psychic energy. When people say they feel empty, they often mean they are cut off from a large portion of themselves. Emptiness is not absence, it is dissociation. The shadow speaks truth without kindness. It does not flatter. It reveals where you lie to yourself to avoid pain. It shows you the cost of avoidance. It exposes the bargain you made long ago, safety in exchange for aliveness. And yet it is not your enemy. It is the guardian of your integrity. Without it, you become a hollow moral performance, detached from instinct, body, and soul. Awareness begins not with control, but with listening. Not with fixing, but with allowing what has been excluded to exist in consciousness without immediate judgment. This is terrifying because it dismantles certainty. But the unconscious does not seek to punish you. It seeks to complete you. Every symptom is a message. Every repetition is a question. Every fear is a doorway you have not yet walked through. The shadow speaks in whispers at first. Ignore it long enough, and it will shout, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. What remains unconscious does not remain inactive. It becomes fate, and fate feels like life happening to you rather than through you. The descent into the shadow is not dramatic. It is quiet, slow, and deeply uncomfortable. It begins the moment you stop turning away from what you feel when nothing is distracting you. In that silence, something ancient waits, patient, observant, and far more honest than the self you show the world. And once you sense its presence, you will realize it has been speaking all along. The shadow does not announce itself clearly. It arrives indirectly through patterns that repeat despite your conscious intentions. You promise yourself change, yet the same emotional outcomes return wearing different faces, different people, different circumstances, identical inner endings. This repetition is not coincidence. It is the unconscious insisting on being seen. What is not integrated does not disappear. It reenacts itself. The psyche seeks resolution the way the body seeks balance. When denied expression, it creates situations where expression becomes unavoidable. You often believe you are responding to the present, but the nervous system is responding to the past. The body does not live in linear time. It reacts as though what once happened is still happening. A tone of voice today awakens a fear encoded decades ago. A look of disapproval tightens the chest before thought has time to intervene. This is not weakness, it is conditioning at the level of survival. Trauma is not defined by the event itself, but by what could not be processed when it occurred. The unprocessed becomes frozen energy. The shadow carries this energy. Many people imagine the shadow as something immoral or destructive. This misunderstanding allows them to avoid it while believing they are virtuous. In reality, the shadow is composed largely of what was once natural but became forbidden. Anger that was not allowed, desire that was shamed, assertiveness that was punished, even tenderness that was ridiculed. When these experiences were rejected by the environment, the psyche learned to reject them internally. The split was adaptive, it allowed belonging. But adaptation is not truth. Over time, what you adapted to becomes a prison. The unconscious mind does not speak in words. It communicates through images, impulses, bodily sensations, and dreams. It speaks through sudden moods that seem to have no rational origin, through fantasies that embarrass you, through moments when your carefully maintained composure collapses. These are not failures of discipline. They are messages from parts of you that have been silenced too long. When you suppress an impulse without understanding it, you do not eliminate it. You push it deeper, where it gains autonomy. This is why moral superiority is so often paired with inner chaos. The more rigid the conscious identity, the more violent the shadow's counterforce becomes. A personality built entirely on being good must repress everything it defines as bad. But the psyche does not recognize moral categories the way society does. It recognizes only wholeness and fragmentation. What you call darkness may simply be vitality denied its rightful place. When vitality has no conscious outlet, it emerges destructively. Fear plays a central role in maintaining the shadow. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen accurately. These fears are not abstract, they are stored in the autonomic nervous system. The body remembers what it costs to be authentic, so it intervenes automatically, tightening muscles, constricting breath, dulling sensation. You call this being calm or controlled, but often it is dissociation. The body goes numb to protect itself from feelings it associates with danger. Emotional suppression reshapes physiology. Chronic tension becomes posture. Shallow breathing becomes personality. Restricted expression becomes identity. Over years, the body forgets how to relax fully because relaxation once meant vulnerability. The shadow holds this memory. It remembers what you had to sacrifice to survive emotionally, and it resents the sacrifice, not in a childish way, but in a deeply biological one. Life energy wants to move. When blocked, it turns inward and corrodes. You may notice moments when the shadow breaks through unexpectedly, a disproportionate reaction, a sharp comment you cannot take back, a sudden wave of despair in an otherwise stable life. These moments frighten you because they threaten the image you have worked so hard to maintain. But they are also honest. They reveal the gap between who you believe yourself to be and what you actually feel. The larger the gap, the louder the shadow becomes. Avoidance is the shadow's greatest ally. Distraction, productivity, constant stimulation, these are socially acceptable ways to remain unconscious. Silence is dangerous because silence allows sensation. Sensation leads to emotion. Emotion leads to memory. Memory leads to truth. So you stay busy, you stay occupied, you stay outward-facing. Meanwhile, the unconscious grows denser, more pressurized, more insistent. Inner conflict arises when the conscious mind tries to dominate rather than dialogue. You attempt to control thoughts, suppress feelings, correct impulses. This creates a civil war within the psyche. One part plays the judge, another the criminal. One demands perfection, another rebels. This division is exhausting. It drains meaning from life. Meaning cannot emerge from fragmentation. It arises only when opposing forces are allowed to coexist without immediate resolution. The shadow speaks truth because it has nothing to gain from your approval. It does not care about your ideals. It cares about your reality. It exposes where you betray yourself to maintain comfort. It reveals where you perform identity rather than inhabit it. This truth feels cruel only because you have grown accustomed to self-deception. The shadow removes illusions, and illusions often feel safer than really. Thank you. You may notice that what you fear most in yourself is often what you secretly admire in others. The courage to say no, the freedom to be disliked, the willingness to disrupt expectations. These qualities threaten the internal order you constructed to stay safe. But safety without authenticity becomes stagnation. The psyche will not tolerate stagnation indefinitely. When growth is resisted consciously, it is forced unconsciously, often through crisis. Awareness does not mean indulging every impulse. It means recognizing the impulse without denial or immediate action. This distinction is crucial. Integration is not expression without restraint. It is understanding without repression. When an impulse is understood, it transforms. When it is judged, it hardens. The shadow wants to be seen, not unleashed blindly. It wants relationship, not domination. Many people fear that if they acknowledge their shadow, they will become worse versions of themselves. In truth, the opposite is more often the case. Unacknowledged darkness leaks out in distorted forms. Acknowledged darkness becomes conscious choice. The difference between compulsion and freedom is awareness. What you see clearly no longer controls you invisibly. The body is the final arbiter of truth. You can think your way into any belief, but the body will respond only to what feels safe or threatening based on past experience. When you approach the shadow, the body reacts first. Tightness, heat, nausea, trembling. These are means you are near something real. The nervous system is recalibrating. It is learning that what was once dangerous can now be tolerated. This learning is slow. It cannot be rushed. The shadow does not promise peace. It promises honesty. Peace is sometimes a byproduct, but not the goal. The goal is alignment between what you think, what you feel, and what you do. When these layers are out of sync, life feels hollow no matter how successful it appears. When they begin to align, life gains weight, not happiness but depth. As you listen more closely, you may realize that much of your suffering has been an attempt to avoid suffering. Pain resisted becomes pain multiplied. Pain acknowledged becomes information. The shadow carries this information. It is not trying to ruin you. It is trying to return you to yourself, whole, conflicted, embodied, and real. And once you sense that truth, you will feel a subtle shift, fear mixed with relief, because something in you knows that pretending has always been more exhausting than facing what waits in the dark. There comes a moment, quiet, easily missed, when the struggle to escape yourself weakens, not because you have solved anything, not because pain has vanished, but because exhaustion strips away resistance. In that moment, the shadow no longer needs to shout. It stands there, patient, undeniable. You begin to see that it was never chasing you. You were circling it endlessly, afraid of what would happen if you stopped. What finally urges is not a revelation of horror, but of continuity. The parts you feared are not foreign invaders. They are fragments of the same life force that animates your thoughts, your longings, your capacity to endure. The psyche does not fracture to punish you. It fractures to survive, and survival leaves traces. These traces shape character, posture, temperament, and fate. To meet the shadow is to recognize the cost of becoming who you are. You may notice that when truth is fully faced, it does not feel dramatic. It feels grounding, heavy, real. The fantasies collapse. The inner narratives soften. What remains is not certainty, but solidity. A sense of standing on something that does not require constant maintenance. This is not happiness. It is coherence. And coherence has weight. The shadow does not disappear once acknowledged. It does not transform into light or dissolve into insight. It becomes quieter because it is no longer forced to speak through distortion. It no longer needs to sabotage, provoke, or overwhelm to be noticed. It becomes a companion rather than an adversary. Still uncomfortable at times, still unsettling but honest. And honesty, once tolerated, becomes stabilizing. You begin to sense how much of your life was lived in reaction rather than presence. How many choices were made to avoid old pain rather than to express current truth. This recognition carries grief, not the loud grief of loss, but the muted grief of unrealized possibility. This grief does not ask to be fixed, it asks to be felt. When felt, it passes through the body like a slow exhale, leaving behind a strange clarity. The body responds to this clarity first. Breath deepens without effort. Muscles release patterns they have held for years. Sleep changes. Appetite shifts. These are not miracles. They are signals that the nervous system is no longer bracing against itself. When inner war ceases, even briefly, the organism remembers how to regulate. This remembrance is ancient. It precedes language, morality, identity. Meaning does not arrive as an answer. It arrives as a felt sense that life is no longer being betrayed from within, that even pain has a place, that even fear contains information rather than commands. When the shadow is integrated, you do not become flawless, you become accountable. Your reactions belong to you, your emotions inform rather than control, your silence becomes choice rather than avoidance. There is a particular loneliness that ends here. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being divided. When you no longer abandon parts of yourself for approval or safety, something fundamental settles. You stop asking the world to confirm your existence. You inhabit it. Quietly, imperfectly, fully. The shadow never promised comfort. It promised truth. And truth, once faced, does not shout. It does not persuade. It simply stands, unmovable, waiting to be lived. What remains now is not light or darkness, but depth. And depth does not need explanation. It is felt in the way you breathe, in the way you pause before reacting, in the way silence no longer terrifies you. The inner shadow has finished speaking. It was never separate from you.